Hello Studio Channel. Sorry for the delay. I'm currently in like ADD paralysis mode because a lot has happened. Obviously the last videos that I put on this channel, we were starting to get set up with the studio. You may notice that the background looks different. That's something that's going to happen all the time. Everything's going to keep changing in response to new projects and ideas. So since the last video, I ordered a 3D printer. Quite a big thing considering it's my first time using a 3D printer. I know I'm a bit late to the party, but I asked around on social media for like which was the best ones, and I didn't expect there to be an easy answer to it because everyone has their own preferences. But really the person I paid the most attention to was on my Discord server, Tech, if you're watching. And it came down to like two main companies, Prusa and what's the other one beginning with a B? Bamboo. There we go. Bamboo Lab. I ended up going for the Prusa XL because, well, I found more information about it. I like the look of it as well. The auto calibration thing seemed quite interesting. And yeah, so I just ordered one. If you want me to show you, hang on. Let's see if I can loosen you up a bit. There we go. Over there. As you can see, if you know anything about the 3D printers, I got the 2 tool head version. Now, it wasn't a very smooth setup. Not strictly my fault. Gee, I got really annoyed with Prusa as a company. I didn't expect that going into it, getting a 3D printer would be a smooth thing, obviously. And I knew this beforehand. When you're dealing with technology, especially new stuff made by nerds, is one way to think about it. Nothing ever goes smoothly. It's a bit like Linux. There's no way to get set up with Linux without something going wrong or there being some degree of hyper-specific setup. And there's always a situation where you bump into something where a process that works perfectly fine for 99.9% of people for some reason does not work with you. So I expected that kind of pattern would appear. It's a 3D printer, it's a complicated thing. I'm going to bump into something in the process that's not supposed to happen, but you just have to deal with it. Although this time, when I did bump into that, it turns out it wasn't entirely my fault. Prusa actually installed a cable incorrectly on the printer. I messaged them about it. They said yes, they were aware of it, but for some reason they didn't tell the customers, so I still have to repair that. It does work. I'll get into the technical details about it, but it was just really, really annoying. I paid the extra, it was like £400 or £500 or whatever, to have the printer come assembled. Now again, before paying that, I figured this is probably a rip-off, because whenever you pay to have something assembled, it's always like a ridiculous price. But the product developer in me got curious. I wanted to see what the payment flow for technology like this is for, like what the user experience is like. So I thought, how assembled is it really if you pay for it to come assembled? And this is quite a transparent process. There are lots of people that have done like full breakdowns. How do you make the printer from nothing? And how do you continue making the printer from the assembled version? I, however, found it a little bit annoying because when it turned up, there was still a lot of assembly that needed to be done. Now, again, I'm under no pretense that that wasn't going to happen. Like, I expected there to be some assembly after the fact because there are delicate components that obviously when you're transporting them and everything's vibrating, that's going to ruin them. But the thing that annoyed me wasn't actually that there's more assembly to do when it arrives. It's the wording of it on the website, because this struck me immediately when I went to pay for it. When you order the printer, you have two options. There's semi-assembled and assembled. I can actually show you this. Just give me a sec. All right, so check this out. You're looking at the Prusa XL on their website. So from a customer perspective, and again, I'm going to hesitate. I don't want to call this false advertisement, but I do think it's a bit misleading. That's it. And I'll explain why. Again, coming from the perspective of another product developer, a customer comes and they have a look at this on the screen. Original Prusa XL semi-assembled single toolhead 3D printer. So the customer reads semi-assembled single toolhead 3D printer and they see this image of a complete printer, especially since it's made in the EU. The EU is all about like these customer rights and laws, right? So what the customer sees, the customer should get. So again, we click through the images. A semi-assembled printer is this, right? Now, obviously, if you know about Prusa printers, you'll know that's not what the semi-assembled printer is. But this is my point. This is what pissed me off. And again, I knew this beforehand, but then we come over here. Number of extruder/tool heads, 1, 2, and 5. If we click on 2, the image changes. So the customer knows that they have agency to control what appears on the image here, right? So the semi-assembled 2 toolhead 3D printer is this. We know this because we clicked on 2 and it changed, right? So it's not just an accidental image placement. But again, if you know, that's not actually the semi-assembled 2 toolhead 3D printer, because when that turns up to the customer, it's completely disassembled. And then again, the 5 toolhead version. So I purchased the 2 toolhead version and I went for assembled. Notice how the picture doesn't change. Interesting. So there's no like visual difference here between the semi-assembled and the assembled. And then there's also an enclosure kit bundle, which I didn't get, but you can get that. And again, a little bit misleading here because that shows more than 2 tool heads with the enclosure on it, just by the fact we've only selected 2 with the enclosure. So there's a bit of a, problem there. So if you don't know much about these 3D printers, if you look at this page, this is just a general question, it's like an exercise. We're trying to simulate like customer psychology. What do you think this will look like when this turns up with these options? Okay, so you've ordered the 2 tool heads, you've ordered it assembled. What do you think it will look like? You might think, okay, maybe it looks like all of this, except maybe the spools aren't there because you maybe need to buy the spools separately. I think maybe like the cables have been like folded down or something, or maybe they're connected, but they're just placed to the side and then you need to attach them. Turns out a lot of it is not assembled. So not only are the spools not there because you have to get your own, although they provide one, the spool handles, you also need to assemble yourself and then connect to the frame. This LCD panel down here, I can click on this to make it larger. This LCD panel is not attached. You have to screw that in. You also have to plug in the cable for it and this earthing cable. At the back of it that you can't even see, there's a Wi-Fi receiver. You have to take apart a back plate and then put the receiver on, although there's 2 types and you could be given one or the other. And you have to find out by looking at the documentation which you've been given. So you have to assemble that. But while the back plate's off, you have to plug in the neck extruders, which is the name for these things. Separately from that, these aren't assembled. So you get a separate box with the neck extruders. You have to assemble the neck extruders, not fully, right? Because the housing's already been assembled. But you have to screw on all the cabling and then you need to attach those once they're done to this, and then you have to plug in the data to the back. And you think, okay, sure, that's not assembling the whole printer. You don't have to assemble the whole thing because this base is already done. But all of these things does not give a first-time customer the impression that what they're buying is assembled. It's not. They have to do more assembly work after the fact. And again, because this is like the kind of thing where you get a lot of facetious comments saying, oh yeah, but this, that, and the other. I'm aware that more work needs to be done for these things once they arrive. Again, I'm aware of the vibrational damage that can be done to components. I know that the company probably receives these things. They might not make everything themselves, and they receive some parts from other companies in different factories at different times, and maybe they're put into storage in separate locations, and then an order comes together somewhere else before it's sent out and all that stuff. I'm aware. But the point is, just from the psychology of a customer flow, what they get is not assembled. Because instead of assembled and semi-assembled, what I think they should have written was semi-assembled and unassembled. I think that using the word assembled is misleading. Now that says nothing about the actual quality of the printer. To throw in like a really positive thing here, when the printer works, it's bloody amazing. Like, it's really fun to work with, it's really fun to watch. So I can't give like too harsh of a critique here and now about that. It's a really good product. And if you can get your hands on one, and hopefully without bumping into issues, which I may explain in a minute, then I definitely recommend it. So if anyone from Prusa watches and thinks I'm giving them a really harsh time about this, they've made a really good product. And there are a lot of positives, I should say, about it as well. So one of those positives is on every component, I've seen a few companies doing this now. There's a QR code attached to it. So like even when you open up like the neck extruder housing for these tool heads on like the heater cables, and really any cable, but that's one I've been looking at quite a lot. There's a little tag with a QR code so you can immediately look up and then reorder a part that you need. That's very clever. I love that. I think Framework, the company's been doing that as well for like the modular type laptops. So before we carry on with my bad experience, I just want to say that those negatives are not a reflection on the quality of the product. They've done a brilliant job at that. But I just think that whoever's in charge of this marketing page here, in my personal opinion, it's a bit misleading. Now, it's not like they'll ever take a recommendation from me, but I just think for the sake of transparency, maybe if the image was a bit more representative of printer plus the components, right? So if I'm selected on assembled, show the printer part that's actually assembled to the side, and then the other components I need to add on next to it. And then if I go to semi-assembled, which should be called unassembled, then show like all of the parts, which may look a bit crazy, right? And then show what they can become. But it just makes it more obvious to the customer, you're going to have to put work in for this. So now to my slightly bad experience with it. Some things are not Prusa's fault, and some things are actually definitely Prusa's fault. But they can be forgiven for it, because like every company has bad moments with customer experience, and some things arrive broken, and it's inevitable. Obviously, I purchased the XL and I purchased it assembled. It's a very heavy package. When it turned up, it turned out not to be like a crate, which is kind of what I expected it would come in, like a wooden crate. It came in a reinforced cardboard box, a very large one, but the only way to support it was with plastic handles on the side, which is kind of a bit ridiculous for the weight that the package is. So ridiculous, in fact, that one of the plastic handles had snapped off the side of it, so I had to help the delivery guy get it off of the van, and carried into the house. So the thing is, that plastic handle had snapped sometime in transit. Now I want you to imagine physically what situation must have had to have occurred for that handle to snap off. It's either being sheared when something has contacted it at speed, or more likely, someone's been holding it, maybe with another person on the other side, and then while they were holding it, it snapped. Now if something snaps, the rest of the weight doesn't just hover there in midair, like some kind of perpetual motion thing. If it snaps, the package is going to fall. So when I saw that snapped handle, I figured, uh-oh, the package has been dropped in transit. This monolith heavy package with something very expensive in it has fallen at some point, and therefore something may be broken inside. So we can't necessarily say that's Prusa's fault, but I think that Prusa could do a better job with packaging and reinforcing the package. Now, after I went through all of my side of the assembly, so putting the next extruders together, the spools, the Wi-Fi antenna, the LCD, during the LCD process, I got very annoyed. So this is one thing that Prusa got wrong, and they admitted it as well. I can actually show you the email. So I'm going to need to like crop this out a bit, but maybe give me one sec. I'll make this easier to read. Okay, so I'm going to block out their name, but it comes from Prusa, so you contact the info email for customer support. I contacted them about two things. One is a malfunctioning thermistor, and the other is the LCD panel. What happened was, when you need to assemble the LCD panel, there's a ribbon cable coming out of the printer that needs to be plugged into the back of it. Now, there are two versions of the LCD panel that you could get. There's an old one and a new injection molded one. Weirdly, both of these require slightly different cables, or different ends of a cable. What I mean is, when you plug the ribbon cable in, there's this plastic housing, and the ribbon cables come out of one side of the housing. For the old LCD screen, they have to come out at an outwards angle, like towards the side of the panel, and for the new ones, they have to come out at an inwards angle, because there's a metal wall that prevents the cables from coming out of the plastic housing. Bit of a weird thing to explain, right? But when I came to installing my LCD panel, I noticed that I couldn't fit it in. Like, the ribbon cable wouldn't fit, and it's because they were coming out the wrong way. So I had been given the wrong ribbon cable for the wrong LCD screen. So what I ended up doing was I forced it. So the ribbon cable isn't actually properly plugged in to my printer, but it's bending the cables now. It's plugged in enough that it's working, and I'm worried that it might get damaged over time. And I queried them about it because I thought, well, obviously, I'm new to 3D printers. I probably did something wrong, but no. So from the support, it says, for the LCD connection, yes, unfortunately, we know about this issue. We received the feedback from our factory about few printers we sent were with flipped LCD cables. So basically, it's necessary to remove the cable from the metal profile, the printer, and swap the connectors. The connector you connected on the LCD should go in the board and vice versa. Then it will be correct. The cable and LCD are okay, just the cable was put in the profile with the connectors flipped over. So they knew about it, but they didn't tell the customers. So that's weird to me, because now I might have damaged the ribbon cable trying to force it into the LCD screen. I wouldn't have done that if they had informed me that they installed it incorrectly. And sure, maybe they don't know exactly which customers were given incorrectly installed printers, but at least pull out like a general email to everyone who recently purchased one saying, hey, double check your ribbon cable. Now, like I said, at the moment it's installed in a squashed way. I would need to take it apart, somehow get under the printer and then like swap the cable around, but I don't want to, like, I'd have to go through recalibration again afterwards because I'd be moving things around. But that really annoyed me when I read that, because I was like, just tell the customer you knew it was installed incorrectly. And this, on top of the fact that you've purchased an assembled printer that isn't actually assembled. Not only is it not fully assembled, it's incorrectly assembled by the company that sent it to you. So that was really sloppy. More annoyingly than this is they were very resistant to helping. So another issue I had with the printer was that when I ran through first calibrations, one of the neck extruder heads wasn't heating up properly. It failed a heating test. And then I did a couple of small prints just with cubes, and it worked about 50% of the time, and then it failed the other 50%, again with a heating problem. And I always had it in my mind that maybe this was the damage that was done when the package was dropped in transit. So it brings up a thermal runaway error on the LCD screen, meaning that it's having trouble heating up, it's cooling down when it shouldn't be, so it shuts down. And it shows you a QR code on the LCD screen saying, hey, follow these instructions to diagnose. So I open up the neck extruder head, and I have a look at the cables where the heater is, and all of them are plugged in perfectly fine. So I thought, okay, so it's not like an immediate connection issue. You're then supposed to check the resistances of the cables. So I did that. I grabbed a multimeter, and my friend Tech again kind of showed me the process to do this because I didn't have much experience with it. Now, some of the heater cables seemed perfectly fine. Their resistance values were in range and stable. But one of the heater cables, a black one, the actual heater, had wildly unstable resistance values that weren't in range, and they changed every time the cable was bent. So I thought, okay, this is probably the problematic one. There are probably like fractures in the cable. Now, again, I paid like near near enough £3,000 for the printer, for the shipping, for the assembly, for the tax and the extra bits, etc. So I would have expected that when explaining these issues to Prusa, hey, the package may have been damaged in transit, the LCD cable was incorrectly installed and I didn't know about it, and there's very likely here a faulty heater cable, that they would have been a bit more apologetic for that price point. So first of all, again, I'm not going to show their name. I'm not that petty. And from the sounds of like reading the messages as well, I gather this person is probably maybe overworked a bit as well. So it's probably not their fault. And again, for a bit more context, I have to provide support for my products as well. So I'm not doing this just from the stance of a complaining customer. I'm doing this because I'm a bit annoyed at how the support flow is happening. I would have tried to have done a better job if I was in this position. And maybe I wouldn't have gotten it right every time, but I would have tried. So dear Curtis, thank you for your feedback, punctuation issue. Please, would you specify after you replug the hot end cables of the extruder, did it show the error later? So I told them that, after I had played around and done the resistance values, after I'd done that, I had bent the cables around into new positions. I made it more stable in doing that. So it has not failed since. Now, again, the cables were perfectly connected beforehand, so it's not a connection issue. I think the re-angling of the cable is what's done it. And if you imagine there are fractures in there, then they could be re-angled into a new position where the fractures are less problematic. But that doesn't mean there isn't a problem with the cable. It's a bit like the doctor fallacy, right? And I bumped into this a lot, obviously, if you know my history of medical issues. And it's so annoying where there's a problem, but because the doctor can't see clinical signs here and now, they think there isn't a problem. If you can't see it, then there's no problem. And then that's when they said they knew about the LCD issue. I gave them a bit more information. I also indicated that I believe the improvement so far is not due to the cable being plugged in properly, rather me bending it into a more suitable position, avoiding fractures. I think it would be incorrect to assume that the heater success is an indication the cable is okay. I said to them, ideally, I would like a replacement black heater cable or hot end with cable send, whichever you think is appropriate, so that when it does fail, I at least have a way to repair it. And I expressed my frustration about the LCD thing. Why weren't customers informed? I also appreciate you admitting that Prusa was aware that the LCD cables were installed incorrectly on some of the distributed printers, although I'm curious as to why this information was not passed on to affected customers. Again, we paid all that money. As I had already spent extra money to have the printer pre-assembled, again, remember it's not completely assembled anyway, I did not expect to have to repair the installation on Prusa's behalf. I consider that to be a failure of quality assurance. So again, keep in mind, as a customer, if you've paid for the assembled option, which is like, what was it? Let's double check that. It's £504. So how many days of work is that for a person? It only takes a few hours to finish assembling the printer. Paid all that money to have them fail to assemble it. I also then stated that I would consider a replacement black heater cable to be suitable compensation. To be honest, I just said that as a compromise. I would expect far more than that as compensation. Ideally, I would want a partial refund or just a full freaking refund for the assembled option I paid for. I would like a new ribbon cable, because when following the guide that they wrote about how to plug the cable in, tried to do that, got it working, but now the cable may be damaged because they had installed it the wrong way around. What annoyed me further is that they reluctantly agreed to give me a replacement heater cable only. Again, hi Curtis, usually, no capitals, we do more tests if there is any issue for the heater, but since it was our mistake with the LCD cable connection, I will send you the heater to the same address as the printer. Is that okay? So basically the point there is they did not go above and beyond for the support. In my mind, they did the bare minimum for what should be expected. So that was my qualm with the process of getting the Prusa printer, having it set up, and dealing with issues. But again, like I said, when it works and when it's running, the software / firmware, the actual running of the printer is amazing. I have no issue with the actual technical functioning of it. It's just these customer interaction moments, the slightly lacking delivery format in terms of the plastic handles for the amount of weight that the package is, and then an incorrectly assembled part of the product, and dealing with customer support for a faulty cable. All of that stuff is unfortunate because Prusa is very popular, but it's all very fixable stuff, and it happens. Like I said, probably better for it to happen to me than someone who has no idea and would just come away feeling completely disappointed and let down by the company. I mean, I am disappointed and let down by the company in a way, but also I kind of understand it. Again, there's a dual perspective thing. I make products and I'm a consumer. At the very least, they are giving me an extra heater cable, so when that one kicks the bucket on extruder number 1, then I have something to replace it with. God, I spent all this time talking about just the printer in the end, and there's other things to talk about. So to close it up, let's, give it a bit more of a positive spin. Again, I have no idea who watches my videos, maybe someone from Prusa will in the end. So let me just show you some fun I've had with it. I have a lot of plans for what I want to do with it. Going back to that medical project we spoke about recently, there's a device I want to make, something I can hold up to do like the auto lancing to collect a blood drop and stuff like that. There's artwork I want to make and sell, like in terms of like 3D things made of PLA. I don't want to experiment with other filaments. But one thing I did for fun as a very meta test is I took one of my Egyptian Ushabti figurines that I had scanned in a while ago, so photo scanning into Blender. I then took the 3D model of it and then put it through Prusa Slicer and then made a series of these little replicas. This is like an Egyptian Ushabti. So again, one from my collection, and I printed a few of these up, and it was a good like dual print test. As you can see, it's got a silver backing and then the Prusa Galaxy filament for the top. And the fun thing about these is, you know, the Egyptians used to put them in tombs, so when someone transitioned to the duat, to the afterlife, they would have workers with them to accompany them on the journey. That's what it represented, which is often why they're seen holding tools. So I've got like a little collection of these against my wall now, and I kind of feel like they're my little 3D helpers. But it was fun watching these be made. It was like the first starter simple test of a strange shape. And I loved it. And what it's made me want to do now is set up a nice proper 3D environment space to previs and then send to print things for the printer. So I'm going to replicate the actual printing board in Blender so it looks realistic. So I'll feel almost like a god in a way, designing stuff in 3D that can just be sent to be fabricated immediately. So in that way, it's very exciting. Just going back to the contact thing again, when the support person said, usually we do more tests if there is an issue to the heater, but since it was our mistake, that bit in the message there, usually we do more tests. Something clicked in my brain when I read that, because again, it reminded me about like my medical experience again. Guilty until proven innocent, right? When it comes to complaints. As if we think you're lying about the issue. So we would usually do more tests to confirm you're not lying. You don't have any trust from us. But the only reason they're going to compromise is because they know they made a mistake. It took me long enough to get the pictures together and to prep and write and then send a support request for that. And again, I fucking paid all that money, the extra money for the assembly. Why do you think I would want to waste my time lying about malfunctioning things? So whatever, but again, at the moment, things are working. If the ribbon cable kicks out as well, then I'm going to be quite pissed off because I didn't ask for a replacement one of those. I think they should have given me one, but, you know, bare minimum. Hopefully I will be back soon with more exciting things, but that's just a little bit of a story as to one of the things that's happened in the meantime. But thankfully now I do have a functional 3D printer. It means we can move on to more exciting projects. So thanks for watching. Sorry, Prusa, if you're watching, and it was probably a hard video to watch to see someone complain. But again, the product, the final end result, when it's working is amazing. But also, you know, do a bit of a better job with the rest of it. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.